Hello, welcome back to me talking about whatever history thing I find interesting. So today we're going to be talking about the gin craze, and I have a prop. We'll call it a prop. Look. Shall we? Yes, we shall. Today we're going to be talking about yet another thing to cause moral outrage to the sensitive 18th century audiences, which is the gin craze. So we'll start with a bit of background. Between 1700 and 1760, London was obsessed with gin. It was everywhere. It's estimated that 1 in 4 shops, or like households, but it was like shop fronts, was a gin shop. By 1730, an estimated 7,000 gin shops were catering to the trade. It's believed that there are many smaller gin shops trading as well, but obviously because they were illegal, there weren't official records kept for them, so there's 7,000 official that we know about. There are up to 10 million gallons of spirit produced per year in London. Just a quick note on like the class and culture that we're going to be talking about today. So society was split into 2 main groups. You had the genteel class, who are people like literary gentlemen, business owners, people like that. And then you had the other group that were known as the inferior rank or the lower orders, which was kind of them. I assume it's not a name they gave themselves, but they're like the workers basically. So why gin? Why did that become a popular spirit? So in 1688, William of Orange ascended the throne in Britain after the Glorious Revolution, and with him he brought Geneva, I think I'm saying that right, which was a type of gin based spirit that he brought over from Holland with him. Britain and France at the time weren't getting along like at all. Not big friends, mainly because France were Catholic and the English also didn't like the absolutism of Louis XIV. So in 1685, Prince Louis of France revoked toleration of Protestants, which again, Protestant England did not like very much, and so they decided to stop all French imports of spirits and brandies and wine. Brandy is a spirit. But yeah, so they stopped the imports from them. The monopoly on spirit production ended in 1689 as well, so obviously it freed up the market for new distillers and sellers to be involved in the production and distribution of gin. So basically anyone that could afford the overheads of distilling and distributing could then get involved in the gin business. There's also a corresponding drop in food prices, which meant that people had more expendable income to spend on things like gin. So gin was cheaper than beer and ale, therefore making it the more affordable option and was widely accessible. So Geneva as a spirit was about 30%. It's estimated by 1751 per capita consumption was at 8 to 9 pints of gin per person in London, which is a lot. The people basically just had more ease of access to the spirit, but it wasn't what we would know as today as a gin. It was still the juniper berry taste was behind it. However, it wasn't pleasant. There were lots of quite vivid descriptions of it not being very nice. But the point of it was to make people drunk quickly, but also the reason the working classes in particular enjoyed it was because it made them feel warm if they were cold. It was highly calorific and so could be a sort of meal replacement in the sense that they could still get that calorie intake that they needed. I like gin, but obviously with everything that the working classes does, there was much criticism of them, mainly because employers and kind of business owners deemed their drunkenness to be a threat to their income and profits for the country. They basically saw them as drinking this imported foreign spirits and deemed it to be un-English and detrimental to the survival of the country, and so they wanted to stop people drinking it. And obviously with this, it was kind of spurred on by a lot of controversies that happened. When people were drinking the spirits, there were quite a lot of mobs and brawls and things like that, and drunk people in the street causing fights. But there are a few particularly poignant examples of how gin affected people's day-to-day lives in a bad way. So in 1734, a woman named Judith Dufour, Judith Dufour, she strangled her 2-year-old daughter Mary to sell her clothes for money so that she could buy more gin. It was said that she got 1 shilling and 4 pennies after she checked her child out of the workhouse by forging a church letter to advise that the child needed to be returned to her mum. Judith then took her child, strangled her and dumped her in a ditch, taking the clothes that she had been provided in the workhouse, and then sold these on so that her and her friend could go and get more drink. That's a story at least that was told, and Judith was tried for this crime and was sentenced to death by hanging, and she was also anatomised, which basically means her body was dissected after she was hung, and it was very rare for women to be sentenced to death or anatomised. It's quite a memorable case and it's quite widely documented. So it said that she sold the coat and stay for a shilling, the petticoat and stockings for a groat, parted the money and joined for a quartern of gin. She was hung on the 8th of March 1734. There was also another case, Mary Estwick. She drank so much gin that she allowed her child to burn to death. I assume by this they meant that she wasn't like keeping an eye on the child. Gin quickly became known as mother's ruin. The abuse and hatred of people drinking this drink was particularly aimed towards women. They took a lot of the brunt of the attacks from the social reformers of the time. So the government brought in some legislation to try to stop people drinking so much gin, and they passed 4 rather unsuccessful acts in 1729, then 1736, 1743 and then 1747. So the Gin Act of 1736 taxed retail sales of gin at 20 shillings per gallon, and this act also required licences for people selling the gin and distilling. This act also required distillers to take out licences of £50, which to buy a licence for that amount of money was just completely unachievable and would just make things go underground rather than it being regulated. So I had a look at the National Archives currency converter to see how much this would be in modern day money. Obviously as well, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll see that they've only got up to 2017 for the currency conversion rate rather than 2020 or 2021. So we're going off that, but again, there's not been that much of a change in the value of money. So they said it was equivalent to £5,910.87. So that's how much you'd have to pay out, which obviously people don't just have that lying around. But fun fact, the National Archives also, when you put in currency conversions, it gives you the purchasing power of what that money would have bought in that time. So for this £50, you could have bought 7 horses or 10 cows. I thought that was cool anyway. I'm having 10 cows, just like chilling, me and my 10 cows. The government also began to pay informants £5 if they could report to authorities where undercover or illegal businesses were operating from, which also caused its own problems. When informants were found out to be informing, they'd get attacked as well. So the £5 incentive didn't really do that much in the way of aiding authorities and finding the underground dens, gin dens. And then we come to a big act, the 1751 Tippling Act, also known as the Gin Act. So this stopped distillers selling to unlicensed merchants, and it also increased the fees to small-time merchants who would be selling the alcohol, like pub owners and those sort of people. And if you broke the rules of this act more than once, like a repeat offender, there'd be quite severe punishments. So you could be imprisoned, you could be whipped, or in extreme circumstances, you could actually be deported from the country. But obviously they had the colonies like Jamestown in America, they'd kind of send you out. You could spend your days out there being naughty. The obsession with gin seems to have plateaued. Some people say it was replaced with tea. I don't know if I believe that that was what people drank instead. So I don't think it was they just wanted something to drink. I think they wanted to get pissed. So that's what I read. On top of strict legislation and the introduction of tea to the country, there was also a rise in cost in grain, and there was a decrease in wages, which meant that people had less expendable income and had to put more money towards food. So I read one historian called Ernest L. Abel, who spoke more about the causes of the gin epidemic, as he put it, rather than the results of the gin epidemic. It was quite interesting. Abel said that widespread overcrowding and poverty actually led people to become alcoholics. The societal unrest manifested itself in the consumption of alcohol, but gin wasn't the cause of the problems, gin was the result of the issues. I thought it was a cool way of putting it. I love a bit of social history. Abel also said that social reformers decided to ignore the cause of problems and instead attack the result, but not offer them a way out of the problem. People would meet up in gin houses and discuss how they didn't want to work such long hours or how they deserved increased pay. And employers decided that these groups meeting was going to cause long-term effects for them. They weren't going to have a cheap workforce who are forced into working long hours for low pay, because people were meeting up, and these gin houses gave people a platform to meet up and discuss their thoughts and ideas that weren't just in the workplace or the home. Employers also said that the working classes were threatening the survival of Britain due to their drinking, and the prosperity of the workforce was weakening. It's almost like if you want a successful workforce, you should pay them properly. Relevant today, isn't it? Seek to assist, not to demonise. Wild theory. So now we're going to go into contemporary literature and artwork that featured the gin craze. So one person called William Hogarth was particularly prominent in political satire and reflecting a sort of social commentary into artwork and prints, so that people didn't have to read about the issues, they could just look at his pictures and understand what he was implying. So Hogarth was born in 1697 in London and continued to live there up until his death. He had a little pug called Trump, which I thought was precious. Look, he's cute-ish for a drawn pug. Shame about the name. But the two prints I wanted to look at in particular were Gin Lane and Beer Street, both produced in 1751 as a sort of pair, obviously produced separately, but were supposed to correlate with one another. So the two documents were produced at the same time as the Gin Act was introduced, as a sort of, people said, like propaganda to further the impact of the Gin Act. The one thing that's guaranteed with Hogarth is a bit of drama. Loves a bit of drama. All of his work is just chaos. And the whole point of it was to like exaggerate and like kind of like the melodrama. Especially these pieces, we'll see that Gin Lane wasn't just people getting drunk and having fun. It was death and loads of death and destruction and poverty, chaos, which I suppose was like the point of the prints, and it worked. It's very clear as to what he was trying to say. So we'll start with Gin Lane and we'll go from the bottom left of this print. So firstly we have a craftsman here and a cook pawning their work tools for drinking money. Then immediately below that we have a scary looking guy gnawing a bone alongside a dog. Obviously you're lowering humans to animals with this sort of image. So then in the centre we have a mother who's been careless whilst tending to her baby, and it's assumed that the baby then fell to her death. Some people then think that this is related to the Judith IV case from earlier on, as a sort of ode to that, about mother's ruin and how it's going to lead to children dying and infanticide. On the right beside her is an emaciated man with his dog who looks very thin and close to death, which I thought was interesting because people would drink gin due to its calorie content being quite high and the fact that it would keep them quite full. So I know what he's trying to get at. It's like, oh yeah, you're gonna like starve and because you can't afford to eat when you're spending all your money on gin. But people would drink gin because they couldn't afford to spend their money on food. You could get drunk for like 2 pennies and full for 2 pennies. Why would you then spend that amount on grain where you could just spend it on drink? I'm not saying I agree with it, but like I get why they're coming from. So then above this thin man, a mother feeds her baby gin. Obviously again referring to mother's ruin and the fact that they can't look after their children anymore once they're intoxicated. Above this, in the house, a man hangs himself overlooking the supposed cause of his demise. Moving back down to ground level, a naked woman is placed into a coffin. On the right of this, there seems to be a baby on a spike. To be completely honest, I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be a reference to or what the man has on his head. It's obviously there for a reason, but I'm not clever enough to know it. History degree is kind of useful, isn't it? We actually looked at Hogarth in one of my modules in 3rd year, and I did one of his pieces for my very last ever exam. Any of you fans watching that were in Shane's module? Punishing the Criminal Dead. That was it. You guys in that would know Hogarth. And then comes Beer Street. So this is like the safe alternative. Hogarth's main point was that not to stop drinking by any means. So the main point of people drinking beer means that 1, it's English, 2, they're still paying tax on it, so it's quite expensive, 3, because it's expensive and weak, it means they weren't going to get drunk. They could go back to work the next day and there'd be no brawls and mobs and fights, and society would be harmonious if only they drank beer. For a beer, 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 beer. So at Beer Street, we'll start at the bottom left again. So there's 2 well-fed men drinking tankards of beer. The man standing holding a leg of beef in his hand is supposed to refer to the fact that if you would drink beer, you would be full and fat, and if you were to be drinking gin, you'd be thin and near death. So above them is a man appearing to be painting a lovely picture. He is painting a mound of wheat or grains with people dancing around the grains. It's supposed to be kind of an allusion to prosperity and wealth in food, as well as personal contentment through drinking beer. I hate beer. So below, next to the 2 men, are a young couple in love, and beside them on the right are 2 young women with plenty of fish in baskets, again suggesting a surplus of food and prosperity and wealth if one was to drink beer rather than gin. So moving over, a young boy hands a beer to the pawnbroker, who no one uses anymore now they don't need to pawn their goods to buy gin. So it's supposed to say that in the first picture, the only people profiting were people like pawnbrokers and undertakers, Where in this picture, everyone's prosperous and happy in themselves because of beer. Finally, in the middle, a wealthy woman in a sedan chair is pictured waiting for the chairman, who have taken a short break to drink some beer. And then all the people around them, all the other labourers, are all sat back having a beer as well. Lovely afternoon, but they can get back to work in a timely manner due to the fact they won't be drunk. So one thing I found really interesting about the Hogarth prints was the fact that he made these particular prints to be quite easy to reproduce. So he put quite a lot of thick, dense black lines into the artwork and a lot of shading, which means if they were to be reprinted and reproduced, they would be easy to transfer over and wouldn't lose any of their detail. So anyone that was to reproduce them would have the same level of detail and people could understand what he was referring to in these prints. Obviously being that gin bad, beer good. So then there's the end of the gin obsession. I sort of mentioned earlier on a little bit about tea. That apparently happened in 1757. Again, personally, I don't think that that was the replacement. I think that people would drink it if they could access it. I don't think they were then like, oh, great tea, like a complete replacement for getting drunk and feeling full and warm. I just don't buy it, but that's what some historians think. There's also the Sale of Beer Act in 1830, which completely removed the tax on beer. Obviously, again, making this a more accessible and cheap option for people, so people then start to drink this instead. Yes, that was it really. I just thought it was quite a fun topic. When I was searching for the end of lockdown, I've been like writing my list of things I want to do once we're free off of house arrest. Don't worry guys, I got it. I just took it the wrong way around. So this is like the beginning of my list of things to do after coronavirus ends. Yeah, so like loads of fun things to look forward to, but when I was searching, a lot of the things that were recommending were like gin distillers and things like that were in London, that like Sipsmith had quite a lot of different like recommended places to go. So I thought, oh, this is so cool, you could try all these different gins. And I've got more into gin recently. I had this, it was ages ago, it was like last Christmas when my flatmates bought me a chocolate orange gin, which was vile. By the way, I love chocolate orange, it was horrible. That was by the by. I think there's such like an increase in interest in gin. It's like a cyclical nature almost. Things kind of come in and out of popularity. And I know that the gin they were talking about then isn't the same as the gin we have now. Obviously it's much nicer and much less likely to poison and kill you. I think it's quite nice to see the background of it. But yeah, so that concludes another however long of me talking at myself on camera. I hope you liked it. It was very brief, and I know people that have done this for like their dissertations and stuff. Sorry if I butchered it. So that's it. So thank you for watching. Chin chin.